we need to talk about something that's been quietly shifting beneath the surface of your life. And whether you've noticed it consciously or not, there's a good chance you're already feeling it. There's something about this time of year that brings clarity. Not the forced Instagram-worthy kind of clarity, but the real kind. The kind that makes you sit with yourself a little longer. The kind that asks uncomfortable questions. The kind that doesn't let you look away anymore. And if you've been on any kind of personal growth journey, if you've been doing the work to understand yourself more deeply, you might find that certain patterns, certain habits, certain ways of being just don't fit anymore. They feel tight, constricting, like clothes you've outgrown but kept wearing out of habit. This isn't about making dramatic changes overnight. It's not about burning your life down and starting over. It's about recognition. It's about finally seeing what's been there all along, holding you back in ways you didn't quite understand. And here's what I've noticed, both in my own life and in conversations with others who are genuinely committed to growth. There are specific things that people who are becoming more self-aware tend to naturally let go of. Not because they should. Not because some guru told them to. But because these things simply stop making sense. So let's talk about 9 patterns that you might find yourself outgrowing. Not because October has some magical power over your psychology, but because autumn has a way of making us reflective. The days get shorter. Air changes. We naturally turn inward. And in that inward turning, we see things we've been too busy to notice. We feel things we've been too distracted to feel. And sometimes we realize it's time to let go. The first thing that often shifts is how we relate to the future. And this one's subtle because it hides behind productivity and planning. I'm talking about the habit of postponing your actual life until some future condition is met. You know what I mean. The one-day fantasy. One day when I have more money. One day when I'm in better shape. One day when I've figured myself out. One day when the circumstances align perfectly. Then I'll start living the way I want to live. Then I'll take that trip. Then I'll have that conversation. Then I'll pursue that thing I've always wanted to pursue. And look, planning isn't bad. Goals aren't bad. But there is a difference between planning for the future and using the future as an escape hatch from the present. There is a difference between working toward something and telling yourself you can't be happy until you get there. Because here's what happens with the one-day mentality. The goalposts keep moving. You finally get the thing you said you needed, and suddenly there's something else. Something more. Something better. The list never ends. There's always another reason to wait. And at some point, if you're paying attention, you realize something. You realize that this waiting isn't about the circumstances at all. It's about fear. Fear of being present with your life as it actually is. Fear of discovering that maybe you're already enough. Fear of taking responsibility for your experience right now instead of pinning all your hopes on some imagined future version of yourself. The shift happens when you start to see through this pattern. When you catch yourself saying one day and you pause. When you start asking, what am I actually waiting for? What am I afraid will happen if I engage with my life right now? This doesn't mean you stop having goals. It means you stop using them as permission slips to avoid being alive today. It means you recognize that presence isn't something you earn after you've checked enough boxes. It's available right now. In this moment. In this breath. And the paradox is that the future you've been waiting for, it only arrives when you stop waiting. When you stop postponing. When you finally show up for the life you were actually living instead of the one you keep promising yourself is just around the corner. The second pattern that tends to surface is more uncomfortable to look at. and it has to do with how we position ourselves in relation to other people. Especially for those of us who've been on a growth path for a while, there's this subtle trap. The need to feel special, to feel more aware than others, to see ourselves as further along, deeper, more conscious. It's quiet. You probably wouldn't say it out loud. You might not even think it explicitly. But it's there in the way you listen to people talk, already categorizing them as awake or asleep. It's there in the slight disappointment you feel when someone doesn't get what you're saying. It's there in the way you curate your words to sound wise, to signal your level of understanding. And here's the thing. This isn't about being a bad person. It's about ego finding new territory. Because ego is clever. It doesn't disappear just because you start meditating or reading spiritual books. It adapts. It puts on new costumes. And one of its favorite costumes is the spiritually evolved person. The one who's beyond ego. The one who sees what others don't. The one who's on a higher level. But that's still ego. It's just ego wearing enlightenment as a badge. The shift comes when you start to feel how exhausting this is, how isolating, how much energy it takes to maintain this invisible hierarchy where you're always comparing, always measuring, always needing to be above. And slowly, something changes. You start to realize that real growth doesn't come from feeling superior. It comes from being real, from dropping the performance, from admitting that you don't have it all figured out, from connecting with people as equals, not as someone who's further along on some imagined ladder. When this illusion starts to crack, something interesting happens. You actually become more unique. Not because you're trying to be special, but because you're finally being yourself. No comparisons. No scoreboard. No need to prove anything. Just you showing up as you are, flaws and all. And that authenticity, that realness, that's what actually connects you to people. Not your spiritual resume. Not your insights. Not your level of consciousness. Just your willingness to be human. The third thing that often comes up is even more deeply embedded. And it's something that took me a long time to see in myself. I'm talking about the addiction to struggle. Now, I know that sounds strange. Why would anyone be addicted to struggle? But stay with me here. Because for a lot of people, especially those who've been through difficult things, struggle becomes identity. It becomes proof that you're growing, that you're serious, that you're doing the work. Somewhere along the way, you internalize this belief that if life isn't hard, if you're not pushing through pain, if you're not constantly battling something, then you're not really living fully. You're not really growing. And this shows up in interesting ways. You find yourself suspicious of ease. When things are going well, you wait for the other shoe to drop. When you feel good, you question whether it's real or whether you're just avoiding something. You create problems to solve because solving problems feels productive. You stay in situations that drain you because leaving would feel too easy, too comfortable, and comfort feels like stagnation. You wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor. You talk about how busy you are, how much you're dealing with, how hard things have been, and there's this underlying sense that the difficulty itself means something, that it's evidence of authenticity. But here's what I've come to understand. Struggle is not the same as growth. Sometimes struggle is just struggle. Sometimes pain is just pain. And sometimes we hold onto it not because we need to, but because we don't know who we'd be without it. Because the identity of someone who's always fighting, always overcoming, always pushing through, that identity feels solid. It feels real. And the idea of letting it go, of allowing life to be easier, feels dangerous. Like we might disappear. like we might become complacent or lazy or lose our edge. The shift starts when you begin to feel the exhaustion of this race, when you realize that there is no finish line, that there is no point at which you'll finally be done growing or done healing or done becoming, that the whole framework of being behind or ahead is fictional. It's a story that's causing suffering. And slowly, you start to ease up, not because you stop caring about growth, but because you realize that growth isn't actually delayed by presence. It's accelerated by it. That the moment you stop running, stop forcing, stop pressuring yourself to be somewhere other than where you are, that's when real transformation becomes possible. Because you're not resisting anymore. You're not splitting your energy between where you are and where you think you should be. You're just here, fully. And from that place of actually being present with your life, clarity comes. Change happens. Not because you're forcing it, but because you're finally available for it. The seventh thing is something most people don't want to look at. It's the need for validation, for external approval, for recognition. And before you dismiss this, thinking it doesn't apply to you, consider how subtle this can be. It's not always about needing everyone to like you. Sometimes it's just about needing someone to see you, to acknowledge what you're going through, to confirm that you're on the right path, to recognize your growth. It shows up in the way you share things, the way you word a post so it lands better, the way you tell a story hoping for a certain reaction, the way you soften your truth so it doesn't make others uncomfortable, the way you hold back your real thoughts because you're not sure how they'll be received. It shows up in how much weight you give to compliments and criticisms, in how your mood shifts based on whether people engaged with something you shared, in the subtle deflation you feel when your insight doesn't get acknowledged, in the quiet high when it does. And again, this isn't about being a bad person. It's human. We're social creatures. We want connection. We want to be seen. But there's a difference between wanting connection and needing validation to feel okay about yourself. There's a difference between sharing authentically and performing for approval. And when you're caught in the need for validation, you're constantly editing yourself, constantly calibrating, constantly checking whether you're acceptable, whether you're enough, whether you're doing it right. The shift happens gradually. You start to notice that the compliments feel strangely empty. They give you a hit for a moment, but it doesn't last. And the criticisms start to lose their sting. Not because you don't care at all, but because you're less identified with other people's perceptions. You start to realize that external validation was never actually feeding you. It was just temporarily quieting the doubt. But the doubt always came back, because the real issue wasn't other people's approval. It was your relationship with yourself. When you start to release this need, things change. You speak without rehearsing. You share without performing. You exist without constantly monitoring how you're being received. And paradoxically, this is when you become more magnetic. Not because you're trying to be, but because authenticity has a quality to it, a groundedness, a realness. People feel it, but more importantly, you feel it. You feel the relief of not having to perform anymore, of not needing everyone's approval to exist, of being allowed to be yourself, even if that means some people don't get you or don't like you or don't understand. The eighth pattern is one that might surprise you, because it's actually about something that seems positive. I'm talking about the addiction to positivity, to happiness, to always being okay. And in a culture that's obsessed with good vibes only, This might seem like a strange thing to let go of. But stay with me, because forced positivity, the kind that denies the full range of human experience, that's not actually healthy. It's a form of suppression. This shows up as the pressure to always be grateful, even when you're hurting. The need to find the lesson in everything before you've actually processed the pain. The habit of smiling through things that genuinely upset you because you don't want to be negative. The way you invalidate your own feelings by saying things like, "But it could be worse," or "I shouldn't complain." The way you force yourself to look on the bright side before you've even acknowledged the darkness. And in spiritual communities, this can be even more intense. Because there's this unspoken expectation that if you're really doing the work, if you're really conscious, you should be happy. You should be at peace. You should be transcending the heaviness. And if you're not, if you're sad or angry or struggling, there's something wrong. You're not spiritual enough. You're not doing it right. You need to raise your vibration. But here's the truth. Happiness is not the goal. Wholeness is. And wholeness includes the full spectrum of human emotion. Joy and grief. Peace and rage. Contentment and longing. All of it. The attempt to only feel the positive half, to only allow the light, that's not enlightenment. That's repression. That's denial. That's spiritual bypassing in one of its most socially acceptable forms. The shift happens when you realize that your sadness is just as sacred as your joy, that your anger has wisdom in it, that your grief is connective, not isolating, that allowing yourself to feel what you actually feel without immediately trying to fix it or transcend it or turn it into a lesson, that's presence. That's authenticity. That's being fully alive. And when you stop performing happiness, when you stop forcing positivity, when you allow yourself to be human in all its messy complexity, something opens. You become more real, more trustable, more whole. Not because you're always happy, but because you're always honest. The ninth and final thing ties all of this together. And it's the hardest one to name because it's not a specific behavior. It's more like a posture, a way of being. I'm talking about the subtle sense that you need to be someone other than who you are. That your natural way of being isn't quite right. That you need to improve yourself into acceptability. That you're a project that needs fixing. That your value is conditional on how much you achieve or how much you grow or how much you overcome. This is the deepest pattern, the one underneath all the others. And it's what makes everything else so hard. Because as long as you're fundamentally at war with yourself, as long as there's this underlying belief that who you are isn't enough, you'll keep seeking, keep performing, keep trying to become someone more acceptable, more valuable, more worthy. And the seeking will never end. Because it's based on a lie. The lie that you're not already whole. And here's what starts to shift. Not through effort, not through more self-improvement, but through the simple recognition that you've been enough all along, that your worth isn't something you earn. It's inherent, that you don't need to be fixed because you're not broken, that growth isn't about becoming someone else. It's about removing the layers of conditioning that made you forget who you actually are. This doesn't mean you stop growing. It means the motivation changes. You're no longer growing to escape yourself. You're growing to express yourself. You're no longer healing to become acceptable. You're healing to become free. And that shift from self-rejection to self-acceptance, from self-improvement to self-discovery, that changes everything. Because you stop abandoning yourself. You stop waiting for some future version of you to be worthy of your own love. You stop postponing your life until you're good enough, and you start living now, as you are, imperfect and human, and still somehow, miraculously enough. These 9 patterns, they're not things you force yourself to quit. They're things you naturally outgrow when you start paying attention. When you start being honest with yourself. When you start questioning the stories you've been told about who you need to be and what you need to do and how you need to feel. And the letting go isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's gradual. It's the slow realization that these patterns were never serving you. They were just familiar. And familiar isn't the same as necessary. So if you've noticed any of these patterns in your own life, you're not alone. And you're not broken. You're just waking up. You're just seeing through the conditioning. You're just beginning to recognize that there's another way. A simpler way. A more honest way. And that way doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require having it all figured out. It just requires willingness. Willingness to look. Willingness to question. Willingness to let go of what no longer serves you, even when it's scary, even when it's unfamiliar, even when you don't know what comes next. Because what comes next isn't something you plan or force or achieve. It's something you allow. Something you become available for. And it starts right here, right now, in this moment, with the simple recognition that you're already on the path. You're already growing. You're already exactly where you need to be. The shift happens when you realize that you're not growing through the struggle. You're growing in spite of it. When you start to see that holding onto pain for meaning is like carrying stones in your pockets and calling it strength training. It's just weight. It's just exhausting. And when you finally put it down, when you finally let yourself question whether constant crisis is actually serving you, something else becomes possible. A different kind of aliveness. One that doesn't need drama to feel real. One that can exist in simplicity, in ease and peace, and still be full. Still be meaningful. Still be growth. The 4th pattern has to do with how we relate to uncertainty. And this is a big one because we live in a culture that worships answers. We want to know why things happened. We want to know what's going to happen next. We want explanations, frameworks, systems, anything that makes life feel less unpredictable. And when you're on a growth path, this can actually intensify. You're not just looking for practical answers anymore. You're looking for spiritual ones. You're looking for signs, for meaning, for confirmation that you're on the right path. You're constantly trying to decode your experience, to figure out what the universe is telling you, to nail down exactly where you're headed and why. And I get it. I've done this too. There's something comforting about having a narrative, about being able to say, oh, this happened because I needed to learn this lesson. Or, this person came into my life at exactly the right time. Or, this challenge is preparing me for what's next. It feels empowering. It feels like you're in on some cosmic secret. But the truth is, it's exhausting. Because life keeps happening in ways that don't fit your narrative. Things occur that you can't explain. People behave in ways that don't make sense. Your carefully constructed meaning falls apart, and you have to build a new one. And then, that one falls apart too. What starts to shift is your relationship with not knowing. And this doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. You start to notice that the desperation for answers, the need to make everything mean something specific, it's actually creating more anxiety than it's relieving. You start to see that wisdom isn't about having explanations for everything. It's about being okay without them. It's about being able to sit with mystery. To say, I don't know why this happened. I don't know what it means. I don't know where this is going. And instead of that being terrifying, it starts to feel like relief. Because the truth is, you never really knew anyway. All those explanations, all those meanings you assigned, they were just stories. Useful sometimes, sure. Comforting sometimes, absolutely. But not truth with a capital T, not certainty. Just your best guess. Your attempt to make sense of something that's ultimately beyond your complete understanding. And when you let go of needing to figure it all out, when you stop forcing your life into neat categories and clear conclusions, something opens up. You become more flexible, more present, more able to meet whatever comes without immediately needing to explain it or fix it or understand it. The fifth thing is related, but it runs even deeper. And it has to do with how we use spirituality itself. This is uncomfortable to talk about because it feels like we're supposed to be beyond this. But the reality is that spiritual practices and concepts can become escape mechanisms, ways to avoid actually dealing with life. This is what's called spiritual bypassing. And it's incredibly common, even among people who are genuine and sincere in their practice. It looks like using meditation to suppress emotions instead of processing them. It looks like throwing out phrases like everything happens for a reason to dismiss pain instead of actually sitting with it. It looks like convincing yourself that boundaries aren't spiritual because we're all connected, while quietly allowing people to drain you. It looks like focusing so much on transcendence that you neglect the practical realities of your life, your health, your relationships, your finances. It looks like using spiritual concepts to avoid difficult conversations or necessary changes because confrontation doesn't feel enlightened. And the tricky part is that these strategies genuinely feel enlightened at first. They feel like you're being mature, evolved, above the drama. But what's actually happening is avoidance. You're using spirituality to bypass your humanity instead of integrating it. And life has a way of not letting this continue indefinitely. Eventually, the emotions you've been meditating away start showing up as physical symptoms. The boundaries you refuse to set start costing you your energy and your peace. The practical matters you've been transcending start creating real problems that demand attention. The shift happens when you stop trying to float above your human experience and start bringing your awareness into it. When you realize that spirituality isn't about escaping life, it's about engaging with it more fully, more honestly, with more courage. That means feeling your anger when it comes up instead of breathing it away before you've actually acknowledged it. That means setting boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable because your energy matters. That means dealing with practical responsibilities even when it is not glamorous or spiritual seeming because that is part of being alive. Real spirituality doesn't silence pain. It gives you the capacity to be with it, to meet it, to let it move through you without either clinging to it or pushing it away. It doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you more fully human. And that shift from trying to transcend your humanity to actually embracing it, that's when real integration happens. When you stop performing enlightenment and start living authentically. The sixth pattern has to do with time. Specifically, with the constant sense of urgency that so many of us carry. The feeling that you're running out of time, that you need to hurry up, that you're behind somehow, that everyone else is figuring it out faster than you are. This urgency turns everything into a race. Personal growth becomes a competition. Healing becomes a deadline. Awakening becomes a finish line you're desperately trying to cross. And every day that you're not there yet feels like failure. This urgency lives in the background of almost everything. It's the voice that tells you that you should be further along by now, that you should have healed this by now, that you should understand yourself better by now. It is the anxiety that comes up when you see someone else's progress and compare it to your own. It's the pressure you put on yourself to constantly be improving, constantly be evolving, constantly be moving forward. And it's exhausting, because here's what that urgency actually does. It pulls you out of the present moment. It makes you perpetually dissatisfied with where you are. It turns your life into a project that you were always behind on instead of an experience you were actually living. And the cruel irony is that the peace you're racing toward, the presence you're trying to achieve, it's only ever available right now, in this moment. But urgency makes this moment never enough, always just a stepping stone to somewhere better.